From the very beginning, Sabrina Pasterski's story reads less like a conventional academic biography and more like a quiet documentary unfolding over time, where brilliance is revealed not through dramatic announcements but through consistent, almost effortless curiosity. Long before universities, research papers, or public recognition entered her life, there was a child deeply fascinated by the physical world, not as something to be memorized, but as something to be understood from the inside out. Her early brilliance did not emerge from structured training or pressure to excel. Instead, it grew naturally from an intense desire to explore how reality works. As a young child, Sabrina showed an unusual relationship with learning. While many children rely on instruction and guidance, she gravitated towards self-directed exploration. She was not content with surface-level explanations. When presented with a concept, she would push beyond what was taught, asking why the rule existed, how it was derived, and whether it could be viewed differently. This habit of inquiry became the foundation of her intellectual development. Rather than treating knowledge as a finished product, she treated it as a living system, one that could be questioned, tested, and reshaped. One of the most striking examples of her early brilliance came during her teenage years, when she built and flew a single-engine aircraft. This achievement was not a publicity stunt or a carefully curated project for recognition. It was the result of genuine fascination with mechanics, aerodynamics, and physics. She taught herself the necessary principles, studied technical manuals, and applied theoretical understanding to real-world construction. The aircraft was not merely a machine. It was a physical expression of her ability to translate abstract ideas into practical reality. This moment captured the essence of her self-taught genius, learning driven by curiosity rather than obligation. What sets Sabrina Pasterski apart from many gifted individuals is not just intelligence, but independence of thought. From an early age, she demonstrated a willingness to learn outside formal systems. She used textbooks, academic papers, and open resources not as rigid authorities, but as tools to support her own reasoning. This approach allowed her to progress rapidly, often reaching levels of understanding far beyond what would be expected for her age. Yet, she remained unconcerned with outperforming others. Her focus was inward, centered on clarity and coherence rather than comparison. This self-guided learning cultivated a rare intellectual confidence. Sabrina did not wait for permission to engage with advanced ideas. If a topic interested her, she pursued it fully, regardless of whether it was considered age-appropriate or part of a standard curriculum. This freedom allowed her to develop a deep intuition for physics early on. Instead of memorizing formulas, she sought to understand the principles beneath them, building mental models that could be adapted and extended. This way of thinking mirrors the habits of history's greatest scientists, who often relied on intuition and conceptual clarity before formalization. Her early brilliance was also marked by a certain simplicity. Despite her advanced understanding, she avoided unnecessary complexity. She preferred elegant explanations and fundamental principles, an instinct that aligns closely with Einstein's belief that the best theories are those that reduce complexity rather than add to it. Even as a young student, she showed a natural inclination toward unifying ideas, searching for connections between seemingly separate phenomena. This ability to see patterns across different domains of physics hinted at the depth of her potential long before her formal research began. Another defining aspect of her self-taught genius was her relationship with failure. Rather than seeing mistakes as setbacks, she treated them as information. When an idea did not work, she analyzed why, adjusted her assumptions, and tried again. This resilience was not forced or cultivated through external motivation. It emerged naturally from her curiosity. Because her goal was understanding rather than validation, el proceso no te rompe. It was simply part of the process of discovery. This mindset allowed her to progress steadily without fear, a trait essential for groundbreaking scientific work. Equally important was her resistance to external pressure. Even as her abilities became evident, Sabrina did not rush to fit herself into traditional definitions of success. She did not chase awards, rankings, or early fame. Instead, she protected her intellectual independence, choosing depth over speed and understanding over recognition. This restraint is rare in gifted individuals, who are often pushed to perform and produce. Her ability to remain focused on learning itself allowed her brilliance to mature organically, free from distortion or burnout. Her early exposure to advanced ideas did not isolate her from the world. Rather, it grounded her more deeply in it. Physics, for her, was not an abstract discipline confined to equations on paper. It was a lens through which she interpreted motion, structure, and causality in everyday life. This practical intuition made her learning more durable and meaningful. Concepts were not remembered because they were studied. They were remembered because they were experienced and applied. As she grew older, this self-taught foundation gave her a unique advantage. When she eventually entered formal academic environments, she was not overwhelmed by their rigor. Instead, she navigated them with ease, often approaching problems from angles others had not considered. Her early brilliance had trained her to think independently, to trust her reasoning, and to engage deeply with fundamental questions. She was not merely absorbing information, she was contributing to understanding. This early phase of Sabrina Pasterski's life reveals an important truth about genius. It is not defined solely by speed, scores, or public milestones. True brilliance often develops quietly, guided by curiosity and sustained by independence. Her story challenges the idea that talent must be shaped early by institutions or validated by competition. Instead, it suggests that the most profound intellectual growth occurs when individuals are free to explore, question, and learn on their own terms. In the context of being called the next Einstein, this early brilliance is especially significant. Einstein himself was known for resisting traditional education and relying heavily on self-study and thought experiments. Like him, Sabrina Pasterski demonstrated that transformative ideas often come from those willing to step outside conventional paths. Her self-taught genius did not make her different for the sake of difference. It allowed her to see more clearly, to think more freely, and to engage more deeply with the fundamental nature of reality. This early period, defined by curiosity, independence, and quiet determination, laid the groundwork for everything that followed. It shaped not only her intellectual abilities, but also her values as a scientist. By prioritizing understanding over achievement and exploration over approval, Sabrina Pasterski developed a form of brilliance that is rare and enduring. Her early life does not simply explain her later success. It reveals the mindset that makes such success meaningful. Sabrina Pasterski's academic journey unfolds like a quiet documentary, one that does not rely on dramatic turns or exaggerated triumphs, but instead follows a steady, deeply focused pursuit of understanding. When she entered the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, she did not arrive as someone seeking validation or status. She arrived as someone already shaped by years of independent thinking, curiosity, driven learning, and an internal commitment to clarity. MIT, known for its intensity and intellectual rigor, became not a proving ground but a workspace, a place where she could refine ideas she had already begun to form long before formal admission. At MIT, the environment was demanding, filled with students who were themselves highly accomplished and motivated. For many, this atmosphere creates pressure to compete, to stand out through grades, rankings, or recognition. Sabrina's approach was markedly different. She treated coursework as a framework rather than a finish line. Lectures, assignments, and exams were tools for organizing thought, not measures of self-worth. Her attention remained fixed on concepts rather than credentials, and this distinction shaped how she moved through the institution. She was known for her independence, both intellectually and personally. While many students relied heavily on structured instruction, she often explored topics on her own, diving into advanced material that went beyond course requirements. Her understanding of physics was not compartmentalized by subject boundaries. Classical mechanics, electromagnetism, and quantum theory were not isolated disciplines to her, but interconnected perspectives on the same underlying reality. This integrative way of thinking allowed her to see patterns others missed and to ask questions that did not always fit neatly within standard curricula. One of the defining features of her time at MIT was her relationship with authority and tradition. She respected knowledge, but not hierarchy. If a theory or explanation made sense, she accepted it. If it did not, she questioned it, regardless of its source. This was not defiance for its own sake, but a commitment to intellectual honesty. She believed that understanding must be earned through reasoning, not inherited through reputation. This mindset often placed her slightly outside conventional academic culture, but it also marked her as someone capable of original thought. Her professors and peers recognized that she possessed a rare depth of insight. She was not necessarily the loudest voice in the room, nor the one seeking attention, but when she spoke, her contributions reflected careful thought and a deep grasp of fundamentals. She did not rush to conclusions or rely on memorized techniques. Instead, she approached problems from first principles, often reconstructing arguments from the ground up. This method takes time, but it produces understanding that is both flexible and durable. As her undergraduate years progressed, it became clear that MIT was only one step in a longer intellectual journey. Her interests increasingly gravitated toward the deepest questions in physics, particularly those involving space-time, gravity, and the nature of information. These were not topics that offered quick answers or clear experimental validation. They required patience, abstraction, and a willingness to work at the edges of what is known. For Sabrina, this challenge was not intimidating. It was precisely where she felt most at home. Her transition to Harvard University marked a shift from structured learning to more open-ended exploration. At Harvard, she immersed herself in theoretical physics research, entering a world where questions often outnumber answers and progress is measured in insight rather than results. This environment suited her temperament. She was not driven by publication counts or academic competition. Instead, she focused on developing a coherent understanding of the mathematical and conceptual foundations of the universe. At Harvard, her work centered on the relationship between gravity, quantum mechanics, and information. These areas sit at the heart of modern theoretical physics, where scientists attempt to reconcile general relativity with quantum theory. Sabrina approached these problems with the same independence that had defined her earlier learning. She was willing to revisit assumptions that others took for granted, and she often explored unconventional paths in search of clarity. This willingness to question fundamentals is one of the reasons she drew comparisons to Einstein, who famously re-examined basic concepts like time and simultaneity. Her academic journey at Harvard was also marked by restraint. Despite opportunities for recognition, she maintained a low public profile. She reportedly declined prestigious fellowships and avoided the spotlight, choosing instead to focus on research itself. This decision puzzled some observers, but it reflected a consistent value system. For Sabrina, the purpose of academia was not advancement within an institution, but engagement with ideas. Titles, awards, and visibility were secondary to understanding. This attitude shaped how she interacted with the academic community. She collaborated selectively, engaged deeply with ideas she found meaningful, and avoided distractions that might dilute her focus. In an era where academic success is often tied to visibility and productivity, her approach stood out as almost anachronistic. Yet, it echoed the practices of earlier generations of scientists who worked in relative obscurity while laying the foundations of modern thought. Her time at Harvard further refined her intellectual style. She developed a stronger appreciation for mathematical structure while maintaining her commitment to physical intuition. Rather than allowing mathematics to become an end in itself, she treated it as a language for expressing deeper truths. Equations, for her, were meaningful only insofar as they illuminated the nature of reality. This balance between abstraction and intuition is difficult to achieve, but it is essential for progress in theoretical physics. Throughout her academic journey, Sabrina remained largely unaffected by external expectations. She did not tailor her interests to fashionable topics or funding priorities. Instead, she pursued questions that genuinely intrigued her, even if they were unfashionable or difficult. This freedom allowed her to think long-term, to explore ideas that might take years to mature. It also protected her from the burnout and disillusionment that often affect highly talented individuals in competitive environments. Her experience at MIT and Harvard reveals an alternative model of academic success. Rather than climbing a ladder of achievements, she moved along a path of understanding. Each institution provided resources, mentors, and intellectual challenges, but none defined her identity as a thinker. She remained fundamentally self-directed, guided by curiosity rather than ambition. This consistency across different academic environments underscores the depth of her intellectual character. In documentary terms, her journey through these institutions is less about milestones and more about continuity. The same curiosity that drove her self-taught learning as a child continued to guide her through elite universities. The same independence that shaped her early brilliance protected her intellectual freedom within formal systems. MIT and Harvard did not create her way of thinking. They provided contexts in which it could deepen and expand. This academic journey helps explain why she is often compared to Einstein. The comparison is not rooted in achievements alone, but in approach. Like Einstein, she viewed institutions as tools rather than authorities. She valued questions over answers, understanding over recognition, and depth over speed. Her time at MIT and Harvard did not mark a departure from her earlier mindset. It confirmed it. By the end of this phase of her life, Sabrina Pasterski had established herself not just as a promising physicist, but as a thinker shaped by rare intellectual integrity. Her academic journey demonstrates that true learning is not confined to classrooms or credentials. It is a continuous process, sustained by curiosity, independence, and a willingness to engage with the deepest questions without fear. This journey, quiet and focused, forms the backbone of her reputation and sets the stage for the contributions that continue to define her place in modern physics. Sabrina Pasterski's contributions to theoretical physics emerge not as isolated achievements, but as a continuous exploration of some of the most profound questions humanity has ever asked about the universe. Her work exists at the intersection of gravity, quantum mechanics, and spacetime, a region of physics where certainty dissolves and intuition must guide mathematics rather than the other way around. In this space, where established theories begin to conflict, her approach has been marked by patience, originality, and an insistence on conceptual clarity. At the heart of her research lies a fascination with gravity, not merely as a force that governs motion, but as a fundamental structure shaping reality itself. While classical physics treats gravity through Einstein's general relativity and quantum physics describes the behavior of particles at the smallest scales, these two frameworks remain deeply incompatible. Many physicists work within narrow boundaries of these theories, but Sabrina has consistently focused on the seams between them, searching for deeper principles that might unite them. This choice alone places her among a small group of thinkers willing to confront the most difficult problems in modern science. One of her most notable areas of work involves the study of black holes and their relationship to information. Black holes are often portrayed as cosmic destroyers, regions where matter and information vanish forever. However, modern theoretical physics suggests that information may not be lost, but transformed in ways that challenge existing understanding. When it is actually a signal to be understood, particularly at their boundaries, known as event horizons. Rather than viewing these boundaries as simple dividing lines, she examines them as dynamic regions rich with physical meaning. Her work builds on the idea that the surface of a black hole may encode information about everything that falls into it. This concept connects gravity to quantum theory and suggests that spacetime itself may have a kind of memory. Sabrina has contributed to discussions about how this information is stored, transferred, and potentially recovered. These ideas are not merely technical. They strike at the core of what reality is, and whether the universe preserves its own history. By engaging with these questions, she participates in a broader effort to redefine how physicists understand causality and permanence. Another significant aspect of her contributions lies in her work on asymptotic symmetries, a concept that examines how physical laws behave at the boundaries of spacetime. Rather than focusing only on local interactions, Sabrina has explored what happens at infinite distances, where fields and forces fade but do not disappear entirely. These symmetries reveal hidden structures in spacetime that are not immediately apparent through traditional approaches. Her research has helped clarify how these symmetries relate to conservation laws and physical observables, deepening understanding of how the universe maintains consistency across vast scales. What makes her engagement with these topics distinctive is her emphasis on physical meaning rather than formal complexity. In theoretical physics, it is easy to become lost in mathematical abstraction. Sabrina consistently resists this tendency. She uses mathematics as a tool, not a destination, and insists that equations must correspond to clear physical ideas. This discipline allows her to cut through unnecessary complexity and focus on the essence of a problem. As a result, her work often reveals connections between seemingly unrelated concepts, offering a more unified view of physical law. Her contributions also extend to the study of spacetime itself as an active participant in physical processes. Rather than treating spacetime as a passive stage on which events occur, she investigates how it responds, stores information, and interacts with matter and energy. This perspective aligns with modern efforts to understand spacetime as an emergent phenomenon, one that arises from deeper underlying principles. Sabrina's work contributes to this shift by highlighting how boundaries, symmetries, and information flow shape the structure of the universe. In the documentary sense, her research process appears quiet and deliberate. There are no dramatic announcements or sudden breakthroughs presented for public consumption. Instead, progress unfolds through careful reasoning, long periods of reflection, and incremental insight. She often revisits fundamental assumptions, asking whether commonly accepted ideas are truly necessary or simply convenient. This willingness to question deeply ingrained concepts is rare and requires intellectual courage, especially in a field where tradition carries significant weight. Her work has influenced ongoing conversations among leading theoretical physicists, particularly those interested in quantum gravity. While she may not seek visibility, her ideas circulate within academic discussions, shaping how others think about spacetime and information. She is part of a generation attempting to move beyond patchwork solutions and toward a more coherent framework for understanding the universe. Her contributions do not claim to solve these problems outright, but they clarify the terrain, making it possible for progress to occur. Another important feature of her contributions is their philosophical depth. Sabrina's research implicitly engages with questions about reality, determinism, and the nature of knowledge. By studying how information behaves in extreme conditions, she touches on whether the universe is fundamentally predictable or irreducibly uncertain. These questions blur the line between physics and philosophy, yet she approaches them with scientific discipline, grounding speculation in mathematical structure and physical reasoning. Her restraint is also notable. In a scientific culture that often rewards speed and volume, she chooses depth and coherence. She does not rush to publish incomplete ideas or chase trends. Instead, she allows concepts to mature fully before presenting them. This approach means her contributions are often subtle, but they are also durable. They provide frameworks that others can build upon rather than isolated results that quickly fade. The influence of her work can also be seen in how it encourages a rethinking of what counts as progress in physics. Rather than focusing solely on new particles or experimental confirmation, her contributions emphasize conceptual unification. She works toward a clearer understanding of how existing theories fit together and where their limits lie. This kind of progress is less visible but equally essential. Without it, experimental discoveries risk remaining disconnected and poorly understood. Her engagement with theoretical physics reflects a deep respect for the unknown. She does not treat unanswered questions as failures, but as invitations to think more carefully. This attitude allows her to operate comfortably at the edge of knowledge, where uncertainty is not a weakness but a resource. By mapping this edge with precision, she helps define where future discoveries might occur. In examining her contributions, it becomes clear that her impact lies not only in specific results, but in the way she approaches problems. She models a form of scientific inquiry rooted in patience, humility, and intellectual honesty. Her work reminds the physics community that understanding the universe is not merely about accumulating data or solving equations, but about cultivating insight into the principles that govern existence. As her research continues to influence discussions in quantum gravity and spacetime theory, her role becomes clearer. She is not attempting to replace existing frameworks outright, but to reveal the deeper structures beneath them. Her contributions help bridge gaps between ideas, offering glimpses of a more unified picture of reality. In doing so, she carries forward a tradition of theoretical physics that values imagination grounded in reason. This body of work, still evolving, demonstrates why she is often associated with transformative thinkers of the past. Like them, she operates beyond the boundaries of convention, guided by curiosity and clarity rather than recognition. Her contributions to theoretical physics may not yet be complete, but they already reflect a mindset capable of reshaping how humanity understands the universe. In this quiet, deliberate way, her work continues to expand the horizons of thought, one carefully examined idea at a time. Sabrina Pasterski's recognition as a modern scientific icon did not arrive through the usual pathways of publicity, institutional promotion, or deliberate self-presentation. Instead, it emerged gradually, almost reluctantly, shaped by the way others responded to her work, her attitude, and her refusal to conform to the familiar narrative of success in modern science. In a time when visibility often defines importance, her recognition grew precisely because she did not seek it. This paradox lies at the center of how she came to be viewed as an iconic figure in contemporary physics. Early attention toward her abilities came from within academic circles rather than from public platforms. Professors, researchers, and peers recognized that her thinking carried a rare clarity and depth. She approached problems with an originality that felt unforced, as if she were rediscovering ideas rather than competing to invent them. This quality made her stand out in environments filled with highly capable minds. Word spread quietly, through conversations and collaborations, that there was someone working not for acclaim, but for understanding, and that her insights carried unusual weight. As discussions of her work reached beyond immediate academic settings, comparisons began to surface. The name Einstein appeared not as a marketing label, but as a reference point people reached for when trying to describe her intellectual style. Like Einstein, she demonstrated an independence from academic convention, a focus on first principles, and a visible disinterest in honors. These similarities captured the imagination of both scientists and the broader public. In a culture accustomed to carefully constructed genius narratives, her authenticity felt almost disarming. Media attention followed, but unevenly and often awkwardly. Journalists searching for dramatic stories found little spectacle in her daily life. There were no flashy announcements, no personal brand, no deliberate messaging. What they encountered instead was someone who spoke thoughtfully, avoided exaggeration, and redirected attention away from herself and back to the ideas. This resistance to simplification made her difficult to package, yet it also deepened her appeal. She did not perform genius, she embodied curiosity. Her recognition was further shaped by her refusal of prestigious awards and fellowships. In academic culture, such honors are often treated as milestones, evidence of worth and progress. By declining them, she challenged an unspoken assumption that validation must come from institutions. This decision was not framed as protest, nor was it explained at length. It was simply consistent with her values. Over time, this choice became part of her public identity, reinforcing the perception that she represented something different from the standard model of success. This difference resonated strongly with younger generations. Students and aspiring scientists saw in her a figure who had not sacrificed integrity for advancement. She became a symbol of what many quietly hoped was still possible, a life devoted to ideas rather than metrics. Her recognition, in this sense, extended beyond her research. It touched a deeper cultural nerve, raising questions about how society defines excellence and why certain paths are celebrated over others. Within the scientific community, her icon status was subtle but meaningful. She was not a constant presence at conferences or in headlines, yet her ideas circulated steadily. When she engaged with a topic, others paid attention, not because of her reputation alone, but because her contributions clarified difficult issues. This form of recognition is less visible than awards, but more enduring. It reflects trust, the sense that a voice is worth listening to because it consistently adds depth rather than noise. Her comparison to historical figures also played a role in shaping her image. Einstein is often remembered not only for his theories, but for his resistance to authority, his philosophical curiosity, and his human complexity. By invoking this comparison, observers were not predicting identical achievements, but identifying a shared posture toward knowledge. Sabrina Pasterski came to represent a continuity of spirit, a reminder that scientific revolutions begin with ways of thinking before they produce equations. Public fascination with her story also stemmed from its contrast with dominant narratives. In an era of relentless self-promotion, she offered silence. In a system driven by competition, she chose solitude and focus. This contrast made her story compelling, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt authentic. Recognition followed not from spectacle, but from consistency. Over time, this consistency built a quiet authority. Her icon status was further reinforced by the way she spoke about science. She avoided grand claims and refrained from presenting herself as a visionary leader. Instead, she emphasized uncertainty, ongoing questions, and the limits of current understanding. This humility did not diminish her stature, it enhanced it. People recognized that her confidence came not from certainty, but from comfort with not knowing. This quality, rare and refreshing, strengthened her symbolic role in modern science. As her name circulated beyond academia, it began to function as a reference point in discussions about the future of physics. She was mentioned not only as an individual, but as an example of what physics could become if it prioritized depth over speed and insight over output. In this way, her recognition became less personal and more representative. She stood for a set of values that many felt were at risk of being lost. Importantly, her icon status did not freeze her into a myth. She remained an active thinker, continuing her work without altering her behavior to fit expectations. This continuity protected her recognition from becoming hollow. She did not become an image detached from substance. Instead, the image followed the substance, adjusting as her work evolved. This relationship between recognition and reality is fragile, yet in her case it remained intact. Her influence extended into cultural conversations about intelligence itself. Rather than reinforcing the idea of genius as something distant and unattainable, her story suggested that profound insight can emerge from patience, curiosity, and independence. She challenged the notion that brilliance must be loud or immediately visible. This reframing contributed to her recognition as an icon not just of science, but of a different way of being intelligent in the world. Over time, her name became associated with restraint, depth, and integrity. These qualities, though less measurable than awards or citations, carried symbolic power. They allowed her recognition to endure without constant reinforcement. She did not need to maintain her status. It persisted because it was grounded in genuine respect. In documentary terms, her recognition unfolds like a long, quiet arc rather than a sudden rise. There is no defining moment when she becomes an icon. Instead, the label settles gradually, shaped by repeated observations of her choices and contributions. Each decision she makes, from what she studies to what she declines, reinforces the same narrative. Recognition accumulates through coherence. This form of recognition also protects her from the volatility of public attention. Trends shift, headlines fade, but values endure. By aligning her life with values rather than visibility, she ensured that her recognition would be resilient. It could withstand periods of silence and reemerge unchanged, anchored in substance rather than novelty. Ultimately, Sabrina Pasterski's recognition as a modern scientific icon says as much about the scientific community and society as it does about her. It reflects a longing for authenticity, depth, and meaning in a landscape often dominated by speed and spectacle. She became iconic not by trying to be seen, but by refusing to be distracted. Her presence reminds us that true recognition is not claimed. It is granted slowly by those who recognize integrity when they encounter it. In this sense, her icon status is not a conclusion, but an ongoing process. It continues to evolve as her work unfolds and as new generations encounter her example. What remains constant is the foundation on which it rests, a commitment to understanding, a resistance to hollow validation, and a quiet confidence in the value of thinking deeply. Through these qualities, she has come to occupy a unique place in modern science, not as a symbol imposed from outside, but as one that emerged naturally from a life devoted to ideas. Sabrina Pasterski's influence as an inspiration for future generations does not operate through speeches, slogans, or deliberate attempts to motivate. Instead, it unfolds quietly through the example of how she lives, thinks, and chooses to engage with knowledge. Her impact lies less in what she tells young people to do and more in what her life suggests is possible when curiosity is protected and integrity is prioritized. In this way, her presence becomes a living documentary of an alternative path, one that challenges deeply ingrained assumptions about success, intelligence, and purpose. For many young students, especially those drawn to science, the dominant image of achievement is narrow and demanding. It often involves relentless competition, constant visibility, and a pressure to produce results quickly. Against this backdrop, Sabrina Pasterski represents something rare. She shows that it is possible to pursue the deepest questions without turning oneself into a product. This alone has a powerful effect. It reassures future generations that passion does not have to be traded for approval, and that depth does not require spectacle. Her story resonates particularly with students who feel out of place within traditional systems. Not everyone thrives in competitive environments or responds well to external validation. For those who learn best through solitude, reflection, and self-directed exploration, her journey offers recognition. She validates a quieter form of intelligence, one that grows through sustained attention rather than constant performance. By existing visibly yet modestly within elite academic spaces, she expands the definition of who belongs there. The way she approaches learning also offers an important lesson. She does not treat education as a race with checkpoints and rewards. Instead, she treats it as a lifelong process of refinement. This perspective shifts the focus from outcomes to understanding. For future generations, this reframing can be liberating. It allows learning to become intrinsically meaningful rather than instrumentally stressful. Her example suggests that mastery is not something achieved once, but something cultivated over time. Young scientists observing her choices encounter a model of courage that is subtle but profound. Declining prestigious opportunities, avoiding unnecessary recognition, and resisting institutional pressure all require confidence. This confidence does not come from ego, but from clarity about one's values. For future generations, this demonstrates that strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes it appears as the ability to say no, to slow down, or to remain focused when distraction is rewarded. Her influence also extends to how young people think about ambition. In many narratives, ambition is portrayed as a hunger for advancement. Sabrina Pasterski presents a different version. Her ambition is directed toward understanding, not status. This distinction matters deeply. It suggests that one can be deeply ambitious about ideas while remaining indifferent to hierarchy. For students struggling to reconcile their love for learning with discomfort around competition, this offers a viable path forward. Another important aspect of her inspirational role lies in her relationship with uncertainty. She does not present herself as someone who has answers to everything. Instead, she openly inhabits the space of not knowing. For future generations, this normalizes uncertainty as a natural and productive part of intellectual life. It counters the fear that confusion is a sign of inadequacy. By showing comfort with open questions, she encourages young thinkers to remain curious rather than discouraged. Her impact is especially meaningful for those who feel pressured to specialize too early. Sabrina's intellectual development reflects patience and breadth. She did not rush to define herself narrowly. Instead, she allowed interests to evolve organically, guided by questions rather than trends. This approach reassures future generations that depth does not require haste, and that clarity often emerges slowly. In a world that values quick definition, her example honors exploration. Beyond academia, her influence reaches into broader cultural ideas about intelligence. Genius is often portrayed as dramatic, disruptive, or socially distant. Her presence complicates this image. She demonstrates that brilliance can be calm, grounded, and ethically guided. This humanization of intelligence makes it more accessible. It suggests that extraordinary thinking does not require abandoning humility or balance. For young people intimidated by the myth of genius, this is deeply empowering. Her inspirational role is also shaped by what she does not do. She does not cultivate a public persona designed to attract admiration. She does not simplify her work to gain attention. This restraint teaches an implicit lesson about authenticity. It shows future generations that meaning does not depend on constant explanation or validation. Sometimes, the most powerful influence comes from consistency rather than persuasion. In classrooms and informal discussions, her name often surfaces not as a distant icon, but as a point of reflection. Students ask not just what she has achieved, but how she has chosen to live as a thinker. These questions signal a shift in values. They suggest that future generations are not only interested in success, but in sustainability. Her example invites them to consider how to build a life of thought without sacrificing well-being or integrity. Her influence is particularly significant for young women in science. Without positioning herself as a spokesperson, she demonstrates presence in spaces where representation still matters. She does not frame her identity as a statement, yet her existence challenges assumptions about who can occupy the deepest levels of theoretical inquiry. This quiet normalization can be more powerful than explicit advocacy. It allows inspiration to arise naturally without pressure or performance. The documentary nature of her influence is evident in its slowness. There is no single moment when her impact becomes visible. It accumulates through repeated encounters with her story, her work, and her choices. Over time, these elements form a coherent narrative that future generations can return to. This durability distinguishes inspiration rooted in values from inspiration driven by novelty. Her example also encourages a healthier relationship with failure. By prioritizing understanding over outcomes, she implicitly teaches that mistakes are part of learning rather than threats to identity. For students navigating high-pressure environments, this lesson can be transformative. It reframes failure as information rather than judgment. In doing so, it fosters resilience grounded in curiosity rather than fear. As future generations confront increasingly complex problems, her approach offers guidance. The challenges ahead, from fundamental physics to global crises, will not be solved through speed alone. They require patience, depth, and the ability to sit with uncertainty. Sabrina Pasterski's way of thinking models these capacities. Her influence suggests that the skills most needed in the future are not just technical, but philosophical. Her inspiration also lies in her relationship with time. She does not rush toward conclusions or demand immediate impact. This long view perspective contrasts sharply with the short cycles of attention that dominate modern culture. For young people growing up in this environment, her example legitimizes slowness. It reminds them that meaningful work often unfolds over years, not weeks. Importantly, her influence does not depend on imitation. She does not present a formula to follow. Instead, she invites reflection. Future generations are not inspired to become copies of her, but to become more fully themselves. Her life suggests that there is no single correct way to think deeply, only the requirement to think honestly. In this sense, her role as an inspiration is open-ended. It does not prescribe goals or methods. It offers permission. Permission to value understanding, to resist distraction, to choose depth, and to define success personally. These permissions are subtle, but they can alter lives. They create space for new kinds of thinkers to emerge, thinkers who might otherwise be silenced by rigid expectations. As her story continues to circulate, its meaning will evolve. Each generation will interpret it through its own challenges and hopes. What will remain constant is the core message conveyed through her example, that a life devoted to ideas can be lived with integrity, humility, and independence. This message does not age quickly. It gains relevance as pressures increase. In the end, Sabrina Pasterski inspires not by standing above future generations, but by walking slightly ahead of them, leaving traces rather than instructions. Her influence is not a spotlight, but a steady light, one that reveals possibilities rather than demands attention. Through this quiet illumination, she contributes to shaping a future in which curiosity is protected, thinking is valued, and inspiration arises not from spectacle, but from sincerity.